Well, it's great to be here with all you guys. This is I will say if my I'll say this up front. If my audio goes out, somebody raise your hand or something. I This is like my 12th Zoom session today, and in the prior two, I was having some audio issues. So let me know. Um, but yeah, I thought maybe I'll just share a little bit about my background. Tell you guys a little bit about kind of what I'm with as a CISO for a cloud company. But then also maybe we talk a little bit about how some of this might actually impact you guys. And I just got that your internet connection is unstable. All right, so let me know if that goes out. We'll see if this works. But anyway, so I actually started out kind of where IT was a little bit more of a hobby. My first job right out of college was working for a nonprofit organization called Operation Smile, where actually I was a logistics coordinator for medical missions. And my side job there was to help maintain all the databases and keep things up and running from a security and network standpoint. That kind of evolved into me getting my kind of first real IT job, mainly because I realized I couldn't support myself long term on a $13,000 a year salary at a nonprofit. So a little bit of motivation there. But I went and started working for a government contractor, and that kind of launched me into what became my security career. Because at the time, we weren't really doing a lot in terms of security. It was just maintaining a network and making sure that things operated. But I ended up getting brought into a government contract working for the Navy. And the next thing I knew, I was doing government contract work for about the next 16 years. So it gave me a lot of opportunity to do some great work with the government, with federal agencies like NASA, and some really cool, interesting, programs. But I also, at the same time, I was doing my master's and my PhD work, and I wanted to do something different. I was really interested in cloud security, so my studies kind of focused on cloud security, which just kind of led me to ServiceNow. And at the time when I joined ServiceNow, no one knew, including myself, knew what ServiceNow was. I think now they're a little bit better known, and it was an exciting time to be there. We actually helped kind of build the security program from ground up. We're doing some cool stuff in cloud that folks hadn't really done yet, and it was kind of it was a fun ride being there for about 7 years. And so now I'm at Smartsheet, and I'm loving it at Smartsheet too. It's a great cloud company. They're a little bit they're a 15-year-old company, but they're also on what I refer to as a security journey. Pretty much everybody's on a security journey. You start at one place and help progress as you go. The beautiful thing about a journey like that is there is no finish line. You never get to the point and you say, "Hey, we're mature." So it's a constant effort. But so it's interesting, kind of where things are today. And I think here we are sitting on Zoom. The COVID really brought about some really remarkable change in the last year. So companies that probably fought, honestly, a lot of the government agencies I used to support fought the cloud and fought going remote until you've got something like a global pandemic, which really changed how people operate and how companies and organizations operate. So with distributed work, you've got this flood of tools. This great Zoom product that no one knew about a few years ago is now like the #1 video conferencing service. So, but also for
poor
companies
Skype,
that are,
they
yeah,
used to be.
I know.
You used to Skype, and now no more.
Exactly.
Skype.
Yeah, no one even knows what most of those are anymore, or poor WebEx. But yeah, I mean, so I think with this flood of tools and capabilities also came some really unique security challenges. Companies were adopting cloud faster than they ever have in the past, which opened them up to, again, folks working from home. All of us are working from this, my home office, and having to work from home and trying to figure out how you secure that environment. It's really challenging. At the same time, you're operating all of these systems that have to interconnect. And also, of course, we've got privacy regulations that are increasing, and folks like financial services are increasingly getting more diligent about checking all the security controls for cloud service providers and everybody else. So it's getting to be a very challenging environment from just a data protection perspective. I guess, you guys probably know this, but the other thing that really came about this last year, really increased, was the ransomware attacks. Some really targeted, highly sophisticated. They start very simply with phishing attacks, but these nation state sponsored attackers are basically going after targets and getting. Actually, I don't know if you guys saw this, but there was a Acer, the computer company, got hit with a ransomware this week, the largest ever. So it was $50 million ransom. So pretty significant in terms of the amount. I think the total for 2020 was $20 billion in terms of ransom that was asked for. So it's becoming a pretty major thing. And obviously it takes a lot of these companies offline for a little while, and impacts healthcare. People can't actually get healthcare. Other companies have had to actually shut down as a result of it. And it's impacting now utilities and cloud service providers. So
it's impacting Huntsville schools. Huntsville schools was hit with a ransomware attack. So the public school system, they tried to hold up the public school system in Huntsville. And you're like, what public school system has money to pay you? So anyway, I mean, it's at all levels.
Well, and that's there's this thing called big game hunting, that they were very targeted. Again, the organized crime folks are going after, very specific targets where, maybe unlike Huntsville schools where they know they can get some money, but it's created a proliferation of other attackers. I mean, they're literally selling these ransomware kits almost off the internet for $100 or something, and people are able to deploy them. So it's really changed the attack surface of what we're having to and what a lot of companies are having to face now. So it's a tough year for, I guess, on all fronts is what I would summarize that. But I'll tell you a little bit about what I kind of face in my day-to-day job. So I refer to this as the duality of a SaaS provider. And what I mean by that is, as the CISO for a company, I have all the concerns of any other security leader to make sure that the enterprise is secure. But I also have to worry that we operate the service, that we have 70,000 customers that are using the service, and I have to make sure that it's secure for them. So all of their data is protected, and that we have all the controls in place from our own people, right? Our access controls to make sure that our folks can't access their data, and if we had an insider threat, do something that they shouldn't with that data. So it's a challenge to be both, secure internally and protect for our customers. I also have 5 environments I'm concerned with. So I have a government environment where we have our government customers. I have a commercial environment for all of our commercial. I have a corporate environment, which is all of our, laptops and all the kind of stuff we've got for corporate. Plus, we also acquired a company last year. So now I have to care about their product, which happens to be in Google and not in Amazon, and their corporate environment, which is not part of ours yet. So it's kind of a unique set of challenges to be a security leader these days, or be part of a security team, because that constantly changes, that environment changes.
So can I ask a question, which is, so in terms of Smartsheet, what type of, for the group, what type of technology, so if you're protecting this data, these environments, what type of, how are they leveraging software as a service? What software are they leveraging from you? And what's sort of the range of data that you would have to protect for them, and processes? Because the processes can be, a competitive advantage as well. So sometimes they don't want to, those revealed as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's so with this move, again, thanks to COVID, a lot of the SaaS providers are getting a lot of new customers because they're having to move workloads off of traditional systems that might have been confined within the corporate environment. And so really today, SaaS contains, and specifically Smartsheet, we have all kinds of data, everything from HR to potentially some financial data, if they're tracking certain systems or activities. We have people using Smartsheet to actually manage the COVID vaccines. Different customers are actually using. Yeah. So it is, I mean, you can literally imagine, pretty much any kind of data. So what we open ourselves up to as a SaaS provider is that we kind of have to assume that every bit of information we house is sensitive, and we have to protect it as such. So we're leveraging, to your question about, what kind of tools are we leveraging? So we just moved last year from our own data centers into AWS. So we're fully in Amazon, except for the acquisition, which is in Google. But yeah, so we're leveraging a lot of the capabilities and tools within AWS from a security standpoint. So Shield and a lot of the components that they provide, but it's not comprehensive enough. So for things like identity access management, we have to have specific controls. We have additional controls for security incident and event management that gives us more fine-grained look into our environment. So yeah, it's kind of a whole host of things that we have to use to get that broad picture.
So you guys are providing software as a service. And I don't know how much of the reading the students have done. I don't know how many of the videos they've watched. But there's all kinds of levels of service in the cloud. So you have infrastructure as a service, you have platform as a service, and you have software as a service. So you're using AWS for your platform as a service.
So we actually we're using them strictly as infrastructure.
Strictly as infrastructure. Yeah. Okay.
So we actually built our own platform.
Okay.
And then basically the SaaS side of it is actually the applications that we host within our platform. So for things like marketing or project management, these are, kind of what I would say applications built on top of the platform, which enables folks to do workflow, manage workflow, reporting, dashboarding, those kinds of things.
Okay. And I'm kind of jumping all over the place, just asking questions. So if anyone is confused, you can ask him questions and me questions or whatever. So, that's an interesting sort of dichotomy, the concept of you're a software as a service and you've built the platform, but then you're using different infrastructure that is not within your domain. So that's also probably a security issue for you as the CISO is, how do you're assuming Amazon has, great security, but you don't control it. So, that's kind of an interesting position to be put in, that they talk a lot about, where security of cloud is concerned, because you have all these different levels of service and you can have varying levels of understanding of the security of that.
And by comparison, when I was at ServiceNow, so ServiceNow still has their own data centers. So they manage the full stack, so to speak, literally from, the hardware. They're in co-located data center facilities, but they literally manage the entire stack. By moving to AWS, we now share some of the security responsibility with AWS. Obviously, they want to make sure that all of their customers are protected, so they've got some good boundary protections. But infrastructure as a service, we still have to make sure that even the hosts and the virtual images on those hosts are secure, patched, managed. So we were responsible for the full life cycle of those.
Yeah. So, the levels of security in a cloud environment are sort of, it's very multi-layered and So, it's quite a responsibility to think about all of those things, when you're taking this into consideration. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, it's interesting too, because the attacks are changing to respond to that, right? So they're not necessarily attacking AWS infrastructure because, the challenge of getting in there is higher. So they actually shift and they attack on the application layer. So we become a target because of our platform and because of our software or the APIs or any of those kinds of things. So it changes the attack vectors significantly too by leveraging cloud services. Makes them it forces them to focus on, your application stack where you're actually doing the development.
Yeah. And you see that a lot in all kinds of different areas of networking, that you are focusing on the application layer in order to get into the meat of things.
Yeah.
Anyway, does anyone have a question? Saxon, do you have a question? Daria.
Oh, putting them on the spot too.
I'm fine with that. I wanted to ask about you, because you were talking about having to marry into Google's platform as well. How does it, I mean, just, so I actually did look at the videos and the readings, and the way that it's presented is like, it's a challenge when that has to happen. But like, could you give us just like a little taste of like a real actual, like the industry process? How does that change your, the topography of your defense when you have to bring in a new service like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, and you have to kind of take a step back. You have to realize that two different companies with two different, development life cycles, how they actually build the products, all of a sudden, on paper are one entity. So the acquisition side of it, seems fairly straightforward, but to your question, it's really difficult to merge those technologies. And there's really two approaches. And again, my experience at ServiceNow, their approach always was, when you acquire, you re-platform. So they'll literally buy a company for its IP, and then they'll spend the next year completely rewriting it within the ServiceNow platform. In this case, for Smartsheet, we actually acquired an existing company that already had customers, so it wasn't as easy just to turn them off and then re-platform. So what we're doing is we are having to kind of stitch the two environments together. And so we're creating integrations much like Smartsheet integrates with Salesforce, for example, or Slack. So we're using the APIs and some of the integration and just building it together. But from a security perspective, I still have to worry about what's going on in both GCP and in AWS. So I'm having to build our security incident and event management infrastructure and tooling so that I have visibility. I pull logs from both of those environments and then write, the alerts and in telemetry to make sure that I understand what's going on in both of those environments. So different access controls, different behavior, and then pulling all of it together and assuming that my one security operations team is going to be able to figure out what's going on in two different environments at the same time, and then add your gov environment into that too, and add corporate into that. So yeah, it becomes, you just imagine that you just expanded your bubble. And now it's not just even another AWS environment. You're looking at a different cloud that's got different, behaviors that you're trying to make sense of. So it's challenging. Did that answer the question? It's as close an example as I could without getting really, really detailed.
I don't want you to get too into the nitty-gritty because I won't understand any of it.
Yeah, well, and the most acquisitions, especially in a SaaS environment, you're acquiring IPs so that you can add that at the application layer, typically, right?
Right.
So think about having to have sort of this underlying acquisition that becomes part of your overall platform, but physically it's got to be logically in this at the same level where everyone has to get it. So the government people have to get it, the commercial people have to get it, the people internally have to get it, maybe, but physically it's somewhere else. So like making it look logical and providing that service across the board with all of their different requirements, and then underlying having for those two different companies and services to communicate, and for you to pull all that and reconcile all that is, I mean, are you gonna eventually, can you migrate that? Eventually, you're going to migrate it over. I mean, that would make sense to migrate it over to AWS eventually. But if you acquire the IP and immediately want it usable across the board, then you have to make that logically available to everybody while physically and then migrating it, like the interim time of migrating it between the two and making it available all at the same time. It's kind of like, in a way, not in a way, but when talking about migrating from IPv4 to IPv6, you can't just turn something off necessarily. if you have 70,000 customers, you have to find some way to migrate it while it's still always on and always secure. So I mean, trying to figure out how to do all that is, it's a, someone who can do it, you have a distinct competitive advantage at your company if they can do it well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, and the cloud migration, it is kind of like that IPv4, IPv6. I mean, on one hand, it's pretty easy to turn them on and off. Like, you know, we can the migration, the tools are in place where we can actually migrate from, you know, Google's environment into AWS by just transferring, you know, information.
Yeah.
But making sure that it all works and making sure you've got the security controls in place, that's where, you know, it becomes challenging, and making sure that you've got the logging and event management, the availability controls. So it's not just about moving software itself. You're talking about moving, you know, the entire operations. And so SaaS, I guess one of the things that I would say is when you're doing software as a service, it isn't just in the application, it's the entire operations of the company. So we have a support team that actually provides customer support. You have to have those folks trained and ready to be able to help customers who have issues with the product. So it's the entire operations model that you're moving. So hence it's an entire business that you're really trying to migrate.
Yeah. Okay. So what I would say is, you know, given the cloud, what in terms of challenges of, you know, threats, are there, I mean, there's, you know, cloud can endure all types of threats. Are there unique threats or unique vectors, attack vectors that you have to take into account based on the cloud, and how does that work? That's anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, so for example, some of the traditional stuff that folks worried about with like distributed denial of service, you can do that on a targeted enterprise and assume that they're not paying, you know, what Amazon pays for bandwidth, or requiring in terms of companies that have bandwidth. So, you know, those kinds of things start to dissipate when you go to cloud. And that's the point of it, right? You should have elasticity and scalability, and that's what cloud's all about. What becomes unique about the cloud and the attack surface, and in a real world situation, I don't know if you guys are familiar with password spray attacks or password stuffing attacks. So this has been a couple years ago, when I was still at ServiceNow, but I was talking with my peers, there was targeted password spray attacks against SaaS providers. And essentially what they do is they grab, you know, credentials that have been stolen from users, you know, whether it's, you know, from a company or individuals, you know, they're working from home and they click on a link. It's the typical phishing kinds of stuff. They're just harvesting credentials. Those credentials get purchased. And then what we noticed was the attackers were pretty savvy on our platforms. They actually knew, once they could get into the platform, that they knew what to look for. And so what was happening is they would buy groups of passwords, sort them out by company. You know, you have, you know, whether it's Microsoft or Apple or Boeing, or, you know, you group them all together, and then you systematically go through and try the username and password credential. And if it fails, you move on to the next set. If it succeeds, you're basically into the system. And they would try that same credential for ServiceNow, for Smartsheet, for Salesforce, for, I mean, you name it. They just go across Workday. They go across all of those systems and systematically try those credentials. And as soon as they got in, then they had a protocol that they would follow. It was almost like they were handing it off to the B team, right? They hand it off to the next team. And then they would go through and they would systematically follow some very specific protocols to look for kinds of data that they were trying to get out of these accounts. So that again, it was really in talking with some of our peers and realizing that this was not just behavior we were seeing, but it was, you know, kind of going across the cloud service providers, really gave us an indication of the sophistication. We were able to actually start tracking, based on some of the behavior, how, you know, what the attacks looked like. So we got to a point where we could detect them very quickly. But normally, you know, a good credential login to a SaaS application, you assume it's valid, right? It's a valid username, valid password. They go in, they're using the account. That's not an alert for us. That's an everyday occurrence that probably happens, you know, hundreds of thousands of times. So So yeah, the targeting of SaaS applications and knowing that we as a provider can't see everything that we would need to see becomes actually the weakness. And they're actually using things that we would normally expect are good to get access. So yeah, it is changing the threat environment for sure.
Well, and I think that, one thing I was thinking about that you all may be thinking about as well, but is, if you have a SaaS provider, so a SaaS provider is providing, services, applications, storing data, data is being transferred, in the cloud for lots and lots of companies. It's not just one company. So, if someone penetrates, a certain company's network, they're going to get their data. But, if you penetrate a cloud, you're going to get anyone's data that's using that cloud. So you can get, a multitude of different, confidential and usable and sellable data. So the cloud sort of centralize, it's that sense of centralizing all that data and processes that could be, that are potentially confidential or, and being able to steal a multitude of that. So, I think that's a unique element of cloud providers, that if you can penetrate them, then, you're not just getting, Joe Schmo's data, you're getting everyone that is part of that. And so that's, I think, one of that sort of single point of penetration and then dispersion of being able to get that data is kind of a unique element of clouds that is, I would think, would be scary.
Well, and I'll add to that from my perspective too. It's also scary because our customers bring their attackers with them, their threats with them, their adversaries with them. Yeah. So every customer that we bring in, I have to assume that their attackers, once they find out that they may not care about Smartsheet today, but as soon as we get the Department of Homeland Security, for example, or Microsoft, you name the company, right? A bank, any of those kinds of customers, as soon as they are aware that they're using Smartsheet, that becomes another potential vector. So, Lee, to your point, they're going to be looking for ways to get at that company's information, not necessarily Smartsheet's information. Right. They probably don't care about our information. We're a 2,000 employee company, right? We're not there yet, but they will target our platform. Yeah. Because they know then it does become an access point to multiple customers. And the beauty of it is we're one platform to all of those customers.
Yeah.
So it looks the same, even though the data is logically single tenant, meaning everybody has their own data space in their account. We're multi-tenant from an infrastructure perspective. Yeah. And so, that once you understand how Smartsheet works, if you get access to any account in there or multiple accounts, you can actually very quickly get to the information you want. So it does become, we're simplifying it for the attacker. How nice of us.
Good luck.
Yeah,
I know. So what are some other unique elements of the cloud that are, you keep you awake at night?
I think in general, the maturity journey is just one you accept, right? That at every given point, you're going to be maturing. So we change out tools. The AWS migration was a big change for us that we had to adapt to. And those aren't the things that are they're not so scary. It's just that there's a lot of work to do. I think some of the things that are unique today that are changing the way we operate, and I don't know if you guys are, looking into all the DevOps kinds of things, but the whole security and DevOps, the DevSecOps combination is really changing how we operate as a security team. So we have to work side by side, literally, every day, have to be in lockstep with our developer partners in order to make sure that the code we develop is secure. So it's literally from, architecture and design all the way through release. We have to be right there, with them. So we can no longer afford to wait to do a compliance test once we're ready to roll code. It's really, we have to make sure that we used to use the term build security in, there's, which I really like, the build security in maturity model, BSIM, that is very much talking about that shift left, getting security further into the development lifecycle. But today, I'd say those lines are just completely blurred. But having the processes in place to make sure that security is being done at every step along the way, that's a big challenge. Yeah, it's also a great opportunity for folks that are interested in the space.
Speaking of, hey, Peter, ask a question. He's not even turning on his mic.
Going off security a little bit, I wanted to take it back. Earlier in your career, you said that technology was more of a hobby, and in this program, for many of us, we have little to no background in technology. So how would you say that would translate into building that knowledge to where our knowledge is and experience is similar to yours?
Yeah. Now, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and getting in, so to speak, is challenging, right? I mean, because obviously when I go to hire folks, like this year, I can only hire 4 people onto the security team. We're very pragmatic about who we bring in, which means I can't necessarily, at the scale that we are right now, I can't necessarily afford to bring in somebody that's early in career. I need to actually have some base knowledge there. But I would say that's not true for a lot of organizations. So the Googles, the Microsofts, the Facebooks, a lot of these organizations, their entire recruiting structure is built around the ability to bring people in and train them specific to what they need. It's a huge opportunity. So in order to get there, actually, I think, Lee, you've heard my stories about interviewing with Google. There's a whole there's a whole side conversation about how to interview at Google. But I would say that really well, studying the space, understanding the variety of what needs to be done in the space. So we talk a lot right now at Smartsheet about T-shaped engineers. And it's this idea that people have broad knowledge, but have specific areas where they have depth of knowledge also. And that's the kind of folks that we're looking for, as opposed to just, someone who's really good at Java, right? I mean, that's no longer going to help us as a company grow, because as I said, we're bringing in other companies, they have new technologies. So if you just know this one thing, you're not as valuable or as useful as someone that has broader knowledge and expertise in a couple areas, that you can say, hey, who can do this? And then you got 3 people that say, yeah, I did a little bit of that. And so you can bring them into a project. So I think thinking about that as an approach, and looking at opportunity, being opportunistic about it, take those opportunities. If someone says, hey, I've got a job over here, don't shy away from that, even if your goal is to be over here. I mean, it can actually lead you to that path. So I would say, be willing to take a little bit of risk and just know that it can get you there.
I think that's one of the ideals and the uniqueness of a program like this is it is about, providing a little bit of knowledge and expertise everywhere, and then the opportunity to do some vertical. And a lot of people, I think, in the program currently, as part of the reason why I think the security part of this to me is so interesting, even though this is a network technologies course and we're looking at, networking in general, is that a lot of people are very interested in security. That's a huge field, and so they kind of have, a lot of people have specialized in that vertical part, and then are exposed to sort of the, a lot of students here were in my usability engineering course, and that's interesting. This is a question I have because I haven't spent a lot of time, researching new software development life cycles, but is there a new security software development life cycle out there, that they really are pairing those things, or are you guys following that? Or
yeah, I mean, so Microsoft actually has spent a lot of time over the last years developing their secure development lifecycle. And they published it, and so it's actually a pretty good one. I referred to BSIM earlier. That's actually a really good one. That's actually used for benchmarking, so you can benchmark companies and identify where you stand. So that's actually an initiative that I've got my team working on this year. We're going to do a BSIM self-assessment, and maybe in a year and a half or so, we'll actually have a firm come in and do a third-party assessment. because we can then use that to say, hey, we're mature
Yeah.
or maturing.
Yeah.
So there's some go-to-market strategy around that, I will say.
Yeah, we all know about that.
Yeah. So I do think that yeah, I mean, it's changing, and that's why I say this whole DevSecOps, the security and the DevOps moving together is changing how we operate as a security team. And I think being able to, again, I guess maybe understanding, what a rapid iteration development lifecycle looks like, and understanding where security needs to fit in that life cycle is a highly sought after area right now. And you don't have to be a developer per se. A good way to get in is actually, just being able to be those project and program leads that actually facilitate the process, because you want your engineers heads down, working on developing code. You need your security folks working on whatever, capabilities that have to be built into that code, whether it's, encryption or access controls, and there's whole models you have to build out for that.
Yeah.
And there's this gap, which is, how do you bring those two sides together and make sure that they actually execute together?
Yeah, that's a huge thing. Well, and so your background is not in heads down coding. That's not your thing.
Nope.
So, that's an important point to make is, that's not what you do. You're sort of the more of that bridge and more of you understand both sides, but you're, I think, more on the security side. That's something to think about, is understanding the technologies and how things work. Is just as useful as being able to code the most elegant class in Java or whatever, so that's something important to think about.
My own T-shaped, career was, I actually started in more the networking side. So I took all the networking stuff before we called it security. I was doing, remote access and that kind of stuff. And that led to Windows 2000. My first government gig was, I got pulled off of overhead to go to Charleston, South Carolina for 2 weeks to do a assessment of a Windows 2000 build. I didn't know at the time that I was doing basically a configuration test evaluation for what is now known as the Navy Marine Corps intranet. So it's still the largest contiguous network in the world, closed network. So, had I known, I may not have taken that job, but
seriously.
And I will admit to you, but not to be shared, I'm not sure I totally knew what I was doing at the time either. I was like, yeah, this looks good. Windows 2000. Yeah,
sure,
looks good.
Whatever.
But yeah, that's part of that opportunistic. So, I took networking, started doing a lot of security related things, but that path, and especially government contracting, took me down a path of working on lots of different projects. I had an opportunity to bounce around quite a bit. And that helped me kind of get some expertise in different areas. And also let me, kind of build my leadership skills, which, again, the soft side of getting to what my role now. I'm definitely not the wrench turner, so to speak. Right. I would hope that I can still get in and configure some stuff if I had to. But the reality is it's as much a business function. So I have to straddle the, how do I make sure that our service and our environment is secure and simultaneously enable the business to move forward? So I can't come in the door and say, hey, you guys got to lock everything down, and developers, you can't have access to anything unless you get approval from our, secure store in our key vault. Because if that stops production, I could halt, but literally stop the company. Yeah. So it is a balance, and I have to look at that on a daily basis of how I can still be an enabler and seen as an enabler to the business, and not just the security czar.
And I'll say that, and then I'll let you ask your question. But I'll say that those skills, I think, are some of the most important skills that I found, as being both a problem finder and a problem solver, which is really at the highest level what you have to do is, I think being able to be both of those things simultaneously is really a benefit to any employer. So anyway, Saxon, what were you going to ask?
I was just going to ask, because you were talking about how you're all working with DevSecOps now or something, at least pretty similar to it. Because it's the most like spicy, trendy SDLC that's, people are starting to ramp up towards at the moment. What would you advocate as being technologies that it would benefit us the most to learn about if we wanted to break into that sort of sector, be it, for like QA or devs or program managers, whatever. A lot of people are going to be using the same platforms on the team. So what's your best in show?
That's good.
Yeah. So what I'll tell you is it's more about the process than it is about the technology. Because right now I'm having to support and somewhat manage and control a host of 400 developers that kind of all do it different. I mean, they're all using their own dev tools, but what it comes down to is centralized code repositories, centralized I can't even say development environments, because they do have some variance in terms of what different parts of the product are being worked on. So you've got some UI folks that are using a certain set of tools, and then you've got like core database folks that are using a different set of tools. But I would say it's more about the process and being prepared to use things like Jira or even ServiceNow, for that DevOps environment. Like, it's how do you actually connect and work with others in the development team, and then also that it's that the testing ability, understanding the environments and being able to test and sequence.
Yeah, being able to implement a process that can go across the organization. So, as long as everyone is following that sort of same process, then your whatever tools they use are relatively incidental as long as you can integrate the code. But that's kind of a separate issue. But
we pick up folks from all over, right? I mean, the developers are coming from all over the place, and some of the best ones. You may have a specific project where you hire some folks, for a year, where they're just working on, your machine learning, right? And that's a very highly specialized capability. Or you have a third party that actually develops your mobile app, as opposed to having them, in-house full time. So I think it really is more about the understanding the process and what has to happen. So I would say pick a tool that you're comfortable with, get really good at it, but just know how to integrate with the process.
And know the processes. So like BSIM is a process. What is the Microsoft process called?
I think they just call it the Microsoft SDL.
Okay.
They're clever names.
Windows 2000.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. That's a really good question. And that's the weirdest part is I think that process is both talked about all the time, and then it becomes this thing that organizations then use to market themselves, and then it becomes can become a big kludge. But having a knowledge of how to help organizations standardize across some common idea of how they're going to make their stuff work, because and understanding how the processes will help them do that. Even just Agile as don't say Agile, understand what Agile is, and then you can understand like the different lower levels like Scrum or Kanban or whatever. You can understand the tools, but if you understand Agile as a higher level process, then you can help all the different people who kind of use different things, communicate. So I don't know. I have someone else who I'm going to put on the spot. So Musamil, would you like to ask Chris a question since you're doing work on cloud for your research project?
I don't have any question at the moment, but the current project that I'm kind of thinking about is kind of meshing with my current work in clinical research. So I would kind of like any guidance on what kind of routes I could go in terms of kind of meshing with computer science and cloud computing with the medical field.
Well, and yours has a security element, and that's a
little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. And so I think the the issue there is with like HIPAA and all of the different constraints, how I don't know if you guys do any HIPAA related or healthcare, customer stuff, but
yeah, you'd be amazed at what is going on in the medical community right now. Well, medical, so healthcare and life sciences. So I'll add both of those together. So you can add in, even the FDA kinds of folks into that mix too. Actually, a good example that I can tell you of a medical organization that's really embracing cloud is Medtronic. I don't know if you guys have heard of them. They make all kinds of really great technology, hardware, pacemakers, that kind of stuff. They're using the cloud to actually connect patients, devices, doctors, and data. High super requirements for all kinds of privacy, for security. You can imagine you've got a literally data that's leaving a pacemaker, going into the cloud, almost near real time, sharing with the doctor. So that their whole vision is the doctors will get notified the moment a patient starts going into cardiac arrest, for example.
Wow.
And be able to, again, this is part of the vision. I don't think they're there yet, but if you can actually do the electrical, the shock to actually get the
so to have a
started.
defibrillator, so they'd have an actuator
because if it's
wow.
attached, the defib, it can be super small and it's not a very big charge. So that actually, they're trying to build like literally the all-in-one kind of capability. So imagine, so you're checking your own health, you're on your phone, looking at your own health stats, but simultaneously your doctor's doing that. You're on a Zoom call, actually having a patient-doctor conversation. You're both looking at the same data. It's real time. It's actually for you. And you can actually do projections, trend analysis, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's how they see, the world of cloud becoming for medical. But obviously some huge challenges. So I've worked with them quite a bit over the last few years. It's a cool company. Love their vision. Lots of hurdles though. So, but I guess, to the question, I would say look at companies like that are really blazing the trail for how the medical field is actually embracing cloud.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I mean that's the scariest thing about medical devices that are networked is, you can hijack those things. And if it's in the cloud, I mean, that's just crazy. But that was
you're going to have some hacker that's like, well, imagine if I can, start a defib on somebody remotely, of course that becomes, critical concern. Same thing with our self-driving cars, right? I mean, all of that's cloud connected. Breaking into those things, you could actually cause accidents and all kinds of crazy stuff. So, it's the Internet of Things connectivity to the cloud is an interesting challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, security wise, everything wise, but security wise, that's just it's cool and scary.
But I should ask you, how many people actually have those wireless cameras in their house? Those really cheap ones, like $20. Anyone?
I do. I did.
So one of my, I only asked because one of my red team guys, when I was at ServiceNow, wrote a whole conference presentation about how the 90% of those cameras are actually they arrive pre-hacked. So they're actually they have command and control the second you put it on the network, which allows folks to tap directly into it. So they literally shipped that way. So.
Well, luckily my cats chewed through the chewed through the cord.
If it's a cat cam, you're probably good. Just saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, people have hacked into baby monitors and scary stuff.
Yeah.
Just yucky. Anyway, let's get off that subject.
The creepy
Peter.
one.
Go ahead.
My question, say for instance, someone were to have unauthorized access to your platform or network, what would be your mitigation strategy, as well as other companies follow the similar protocols, or they have their own?
Yeah, I mean, so we have to operate in a scenario where we believe that at some point it's going to happen, meaning access. So what we do is we build our controls to limit what someone can do once they were in the environment. So even from a user perspective, a legitimate user, they obviously can't go from one account to another. So we have to build specific access controls. We also provide similar kinds of access controls for our developers. So if you're a developer on the API team, you actually don't have access to core database. And so we build a lot of that in there so that if someone does get in, it's contained at least a little bit. The processes are pretty similar across the board, especially, well, for SaaS providers, we default to, stop them, eradicate, and then resume operations. We will worry about forensics and attribution and all that kind of stuff later. Like the moment that it happens, we're all about maintaining the service, protecting customer data. So we won't even bother with, sitting down and trying to figure out, oh, well, where's this IP address coming from? And, can we attribute that to, some, Russian crime syndicate or something like that? Like we don't even care at that point. In fact, we'll even hand that off to the FBI or somebody. We won't even spend our time on it. So our focus is we want to contain the event so that it doesn't spread to other customers. We need to be able to identify which customers could be impacted. So there is some triage trying to figure out, because we're under legal contractual liability to actually contact our customers when we believe that their data could be, or it's either confirmed or could be impacted by a security event. So from the moment that we detect, we've got to figure that out. And then we start the communications process with the customers to let them know what's going on. And then we kind of keep them updated as we go through it. But it's definitely to contain, eradicate, get back to normal. Then we start doing kind of the lessons learned, figure out what happened, do some other mitigation strategies, that kind of thing.
We have about 6 minutes left, but one question I was going to ask in listening to that was, you talked about how there was this concept of people being able to get into the cloud using just regular access where you wouldn't be able to, there's nothing to trip you up or give you any notice. So if you can talk about them, are there any particular strategies that you use, either unique to the cloud or not, to kind of handle that or, redirect those people or, find them? And so I'm interested in how you handle that.
Yeah, whole area of user behavior analytics is kind of coming out. It's tied to identity access management, but it's really about, so as a SaaS provider, we actually have a one clear advantage. We've got a whole lot of people using the same product, the same platform. It enables us to do trend analysis and basically behavior mapping on what is normal. So we can define the normal behavior of our application so we can actually detect true anomalies. So what we look for, and even using my example that I was talking about with the password spray attacks, we were able to refine our alerts and trigger off of, within seconds, we could identify when a normal access event occurred that immediately led to specific steps. That's why I say it looked like they were following almost a protocol. So when you get in, you do the following things. Well, we could track exactly what those things looked like, and any time that sequence occurred, we would trigger off of it. So it does help us by looking at that entire environment and knowing that. So in most, I would say corporate or enterprise environments, you've got probably 50 applications you're worried about. That becomes a pretty hard thing because they all act differently. Within cloud and specifically SaaS, because it is one application, because that entire environment is contained to just that one application, we can actually narrow that down. So we're able to do a little bit of detection, look for those behaviors, really trigger off of those anomalies. And even if it's just suspicious, at least it gets us engaged in the mode of saying, hey, what is going on here? Can we look at it? Sometimes it's not security. It could be like these days it could be somebody did something wrong with the code. So we're detecting our own mistakes, creating an outage or a failure or a fault or something. But it does help us with being able to do some triage.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so excited. I've been dreaming of that since I started. In like 2004 with one of my research projects. So yay, it's coming to fruition.
It is.
It may not be me that's developing it now, but that's so cool. Awesome. All right. Does anybody have any more questions for Chris, Daria, Maddie, Henry, Teresa, Michelle, anybody? I won't call on you directly. Or I'll call on Daria. All right. Well, I'll let you go. Thank you so much for being the 12th Zoom meeting.
Yeah, this was a good way to finish my day. I'm glad. This was a lot of fun. And I guess I would say, if you guys do think of questions, feel free to, through Lee, you can. I'm happy to respond, or, just let me know. And if you want to investigate Chris more, he's on LinkedIn. Yeah.
And Smartsheet. So anyway, thank you so much for talking with us. Yeah. Are there any last questions before he gets to go and enjoy his evening at home?
You guys you'll appreciate this. So tomorrow is the deadline for doing our annual security awareness and privacy training, and I have not done mine yet. So that is actually what, after this call, that is what I'm going to do, because if I show up on the list that I'm supposed to enforce, that's not a good thing for me tomorrow. So
well, you enjoy that.
Yes, should be great. The good thing is I know the content pretty well.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you so much again. It was great to see you as always. Yeah. And I keep saying any last questions, but you can see their smiling faces. And so thank you. Yeah. And I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Good luck, everybody. See ya.